every generation is drawn to the past, to a seemingly better time, where the worries of today are decades from coming to be. Where are you drawn? To your childhood, those mornings of carefree joy where nothing bad could ever exist? Or to another decade long gone before you were even born? The 1970s and early 80s were a time of nostalgia for the golden age of America, with a wave of love for the 1950s post-war boom felt in TV, film, even politics. On one side of this decade of mid-century sentimentality stands George Lucas's American Graffiti in 1973, a movie about a moment in time where anything seemed possible. On the other is Stephen King's horror novel Christine, and John Carpenter's film adaptation in 1983. A story about the past coming back to life and killing anyone in her way. With cars, coming of age, and the past at its center, these two stories are more than just interlinked by thematics and aesthetics. Christine is a direct response to American Graffiti, with one creator hoping to recapture their youth for a moment, and the other seeing its effects on the here and now. On the inspiration behind Christine and her undying rage, King said, "One night, as I was turning into my driveway, I saw the odometer numbers on my car turn from 9,999.9 to 10,000. I found myself wondering if there might not be a story in an odometer that ran backward. The car, I thought, would get younger instead of older, finally collapsing into its component parts. The next day, I started writing it. I thought it would be a funny short story, a kind of American Graffiti. Instead, a fairly long novel came out, a supernatural tale about girlfriends, boyfriends, and Christine. This is the story of George Lucas's American Graffiti, Stephen King's Christine, and John Carpenter's adaptation. A story of love and death in a teenage dream of an age that was never really there. Released in 1973, American Graffiti, directed by George Lucas and written by Lucas with Gloria Katz and Willard Huck, is set in 1962, detailing the last summer evening in Modesto, California before a group of recent high school graduate friends go their separate ways. But even just a decade removed from the time it depicts, Graffiti's sense of nostalgia is so strong. And that's because Lucas based the film on his own experience growing up in Modesto, where the year 1962 not only saw the future director graduate from high school, but also nearly die in a car crash that totaled his souped-up Auto Bianchi Bianchini. And each main character of American Graffiti pulls from a different side of Lucas's early years. The hot rod cruiser of John Milner, the nerdy, romantically struggling Terry the Toad Fields, and the college-bound, soon-to-flourish Kurt Henderson. Cruising was gone, and I felt compelled to document the whole experience and what my generation used as a way of meeting girls, said Lucas. THX 1138 was about real things that were going on and the problems we're faced with. I realized after making THX that those problems are so real that most of us have to face those things every day, so we're in a constant state of frustration. That just makes us more depressed than we were before. So I made a film where, essentially, we can get rid of some of those frustrations. The feeling that everything seems futile. And that's the purpose of nostalgia. Without much real plot, Graffiti is just as much about the growth experienced by each character over the course of one meandering summer night, as it is about capturing the essence of a bygone era. Even the little bits of narrative tension, like Kurt's run-in with the Greaser Pharaoh gang, are rendered benign by the end. It's a story of people considering who they want to be, living out a mini fantasy, and choosing the path that will define the rest of their lives. Steve and Lori consider breaking up at the start of college before deciding to stay together in Modesto. John has a night of responsibility driving around young Carol before embracing his drag racing side. Toad lives out a fantasy of being cool behind the wheel of Steve's car before being honest with himself and his date Debbie. And Kurt thinks of staying in Modesto instead of leaving for college before a run-in with the legendary Wolfman Jack convinces him to chase his dreams. Visually, there's something so captivating about Graffiti that's constantly sparking pangs of nostalgia. All that bright neon shining off polished chrome that's casually everywhere, yet almost impossible to find today. Set across one night, the dark backgrounds of Modesto make every light shine as bright as possible and hide the smallness of the town. But when the day breaks, Lucas reveals just how little to life there is here in Central California. It's no wonder why everyone feels stuck, born to either move as far away as possible or stay rooted here forever. Sonically, Graffiti is filled with the roars of classic cars cruising the night, the laughter of friends enjoying their fleeting moments together, and is wallpapered with dozens of classic rock and doo-wop tunes of the time that take the place of a traditional score and would immediately copyright claim this video if I played them. You're just gonna have to rewatch the movie to enjoy all those songs. Drive-ins, dances, cruising, rock and roll, pranks, Wolfman Jack on the radio. Graffiti is filled with a carefree nature that is rooted in America's golden age. And underneath it all, muscle cars that embody the teenage dream of freedom. Everyone on foot outside of a car feels stuck in place in Lucas's film. The car, whether bought, borrowed, or stolen, is the gateway to adulthood. What is it about cars that make them so intertwined with the American myth? After World War II, the US economy boomed, with the auto industry in particular benefiting as new car sales quadrupled between 1945 and 1955, with 75% of households owning a car by the end of the 50s. The car is a vision of independence, of individualism, of raw, man-made power controlled by the will of the driver. It's a dream of the open road that will bring you to wherever you want your life to be. In American Graffiti, our characters are stuck in Modesto. But even in that neon-lit nighttime dream, these small roads feel like the purest form of freedom. Graffiti's ambitions are small. Capture a bygone time that meant something to its creator and invite us in for a few hours. And it does that perfectly. Ultimately, I think American Graffiti is the right way to create nostalgia. It captures not just the look, sound, and feel of a time and place, but the spirit and meaning of it without insisting that the past was better than today. It reminds you that the past is the past, and nothing can bring it back. Compared to Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138, whose financial failure pushed the creator to make this much more human story at the insistence of friend Francis Ford Coppola, American Graffiti was a huge hit. Of course, we all know that the success gave Lucas the chance to make Star Wars, where Tatooine and Luke Skywalker became sci-fi stand-ins for Modesto and Lucas. But it also sparked a wave of mid-century nostalgia on film and TV. Happy Days and The Lords of Flatbush in 1974. The adaptation of Grease in 1978. There was also more American Graffiti in 1979, but I think we can all forget that one. The cultural resonance of American Graffiti, and the continued nostalgia for the era that quickly came to be contextualized as America's golden age, inspired Stephen King. On the rise in the world of horror fiction and quickly crossing over into mainstream success thanks to hit adaptations like Carrie and Salem's Lot, to make his own spin on the wave of nostalgia seen across the nation. But apropos for the young horror master, this vision of the past would not be a friendly one. Stephen King's Christine was released on April 29, 1983 by Viking Press, the 13th novel published by the author including his work as Richard Bachman, and takes place in 1978, following Dennis Gilder, a Pittsburgh high school football player, his terminally nerdy best friend Arnie Cunningham, and the girl that enters both of their lives, Lee Cabot. King's novel opens with Arnie and Dennis happening upon the broken-down 1958 Plymouth Fury Christine for sale in the yard of the rage-filled Roland LeBay. Immediately, Arnie is compelled to buy the hunk of junk, and King traces the following months as he restores Christine and begins dating Lee. All the while, Dennis works to learn the truth behind Christine and LeBay, who kills himself shortly after selling the car. And the truth is that Christine's 20 years are filled with tragedy, as LeBay, a hateful man whose wife and daughter died under mysterious circumstances in Christine, turned the vehicle into a vessel for his spirit, which now seeks to possess Arnie. Eventually, Christine turns her fury on the bullies that targeted Arnie and vandalized her, while Arnie slowly turns into a young version of LeBay's greaser from hell, before the three main characters are set on a collision course to destroy Christine and save Arnie's soul. An audience can relate to a certain degree to something like a haunted house, the Amityville horror, traditional horrors like ghosts, vampires, and things like that, said King. You give them a car or any inanimate object, and you're suggesting something that is either along the pulpy lines of the EC comics or else obviously symbolic. The car is a symbol for the technological age, or for the end of innocence, when it plays such a part in adolescence and growing up. When you do that, you're really starting to take a risk. But that's also where the excitement is. If you can make somebody go along with that concept, that's really wonderful. There's a palpable sense of anger flowing through the pages of Christine that connects the aggression of the bullies that target Arnie, to LeBay's decades of blood-curdling rage, to the hatred growing within Arnie toward everything around him. It's the pulsing hormones and uncontrollable feelings of the teenage years. Laid up in the hospital for months, all Dennis can do is watch his friend slowly slip away as he comes to understand the truth behind Christine. I think that everybody has a backhoe in his or her head, and at moments of stress or trouble, you can fire it up and simply push everything into a great big slit trench in the floor of your conscious mind. Get rid of it. Bury it. Except that slit trench goes down into the subconscious, and sometimes, in dreams, the bodies stir and walk. I dreamed of Christine again that night. Arnie behind the wheel this time. The decomposing corpse of Roland D. LeBay lolling obscenely in the shotgun seat as the car roared out of the garage at me, pinning me with the savage circle of its headlights. I woke up with my pillow crammed against my mouth to stifle the screams. On his reason behind choosing a 58 Fury, King said, "They're almost totally forgotten cars. They were the most mundane 50s car that I could remember. I didn't want a car that already had a legend attached to it like the 50s Thunderbird, the Ford Galaxies, etc. You know how these things grow." On the other hand, nobody ever talked about the Plymouth products. There are a lot of running themes found throughout King's bibliography. Not all are present in every book, but with so many published over the years, each has been given ample time to be explored across many different iterations. The fear of losing family, the multiverse, addiction, the struggles and joys of writing. In Christine, King explores the attraction and terror between man and machine that can be traced all the way back to his days working in a laundrette, washing blood-soaked, maggot-filled hospital sheets with an industrial-strength mangler. Christine is the allure and danger of man's symbiotic relationship with a machine that empowers yet obsesses. But what I find binds so much together is what I've come to call Americana horror. White picket fences, charming small towns, rock and roll, the nuclear family, mid-century nostalgia that seems to make the past so much brighter. And of course, those classic cars. One day, I'll make an entire video dedicated to the Americana horror of Stephen King, as seen across his works, where an idyllic surface hides a horrible truth underneath. But here in Christine, 50s nostalgia is embodied in the blood-red body of the central Plymouth Fury, luring Arnie Cunningham into a vision of the past, far away from his current misery. But as Christine rolls back the years, the horrors underneath that increasingly shiny exterior are slowly revealed. The radio played. It was WDIL all the way across the dial. The news came on. Eisenhower had predicted, at the AFL-CIO convention, a future of labor and management marching harmoniously into the future together. Dave Beck had denied that the Teamsters Union was a front for the rackets. Rock and roller Eddie Cochran had been killed in a car crash while en route to London's Heathrow Airport. 3 hours of emergency surgery had failed to save his life. The Russians were rattling their ICBMs. WDIL played the oldies all week long, but on the weekends they got really dedicated. 50s newscasts. Wow, that was... never heard anything like that before. A really neat idea. That was totally insane. Pretty neat. King's novel is divided into 3 parts. Dennis, teenage car songs. Arnie, teenage love songs. And Christine, teenage death songs, with the chapters in each starting with lyrics from classic rock and roll that fall into their respective categories. King's story starts with the perspective of Dennis, who reflects on how Arnie first found Christine, his journey to understand what was happening to his best friend, and how Christine eventually destroyed a shy nerd turned hateful greaser. But when Dennis spends months in the hospital after a football injury, seen in the film but quickly skipped through, King shifts to an omniscient third person focused on Arnie's changes, and his girlfriend Lee's attraction turned fear. As an author, King has always had a tendency to write long, willing to explore tangents, context, diversions in the mind of his characters, and past experiences that fill out personalities. In Christine, a 526-page story that could easily be a tight and terrifying novella about a machine filled with man's hatred, the narrative becomes a little too baggy, with its side plot of garage owner Will Darnell's smuggling business more of a complication than something necessary. Still, what King's story is in pursuit of is a coming-of-age tale that illustrates how the pursuit of adulthood, masculinity, and nostalgia doesn't result in the cliched Hollywood hero. They leave someone cold, bitter, and terribly alone. His eyes widened. The slice of pizza began to tremble, the long threads of cheese dangling down beginning to sway like the strands of a spiderweb broken by the wind. It wasn't LeBay sitting there anymore. It was him. It was Arnie Cunningham at roughly age 50. His older self was wearing a slightly yellowed t-shirt and dirty, oil-smeared blue jeans. The glasses were horn rims, taped at one bow. The hair was cut short and receding. The gray eyes were muddy and bloodshot. The mouth had taken all the tucks of sour loneliness. Because this thing, apparition, whatever it was alone. He felt that. Alone except for Christine. Inside Christine lived the souls of every victim. It's quite literally a haunted house on wheels. And Arnie is overtaken by LeBay by its third part, receding from the narrative as Dennis and Lee come back into focus. For King, it's not a time period or an object or a place that is necessarily evil, but the impression a soul leaves on it that haunts those that cross its path. I grew up in the 50s. That's my generation, said King. I think there's been a fair amount of that from writers whom I would say are now the establishment. So there are a lot of us who actually developed our understanding of life, who grew to be not adults, but thinking human beings in the 50s. I've got a lot of good memories from the 50s. Somebody once said that life was the rise of consciousness. For me, rock and roll was the rise of consciousness. It was like a big sun bursting over my life. That's when I really started to live. And that was brought on by the music of the 50s. Given King's love of the era, I find it fascinating that he was so willing to frame it as the start of a tragedy that would destroy the lives of an innocent teenager and his family. Still, with LeBay at the heart of the horror, it's ultimately the result of one man and not an era. Another horror master's take on the material would be far less reverent of the time. With the film rights to Christine sold before the book was even published, John Carpenter's adaptation was released only 8 months later on December 9th, 1983. Christine was made in the aftermath of Carpenter's remake of The Thing failing at the box office, with its financial shortcomings causing Universal Pictures to drop him from their production of a King adaptation, Firestarter. Now, without a next step in his career, Carpenter went to Columbia Pictures, who quickly hired him on to direct their own King. Christine, the movie, was written by Bill Phillips at the request of Carpenter, and while the film largely follows the trajectory of the book, it's leaner, meaner, and makes one important change. Our star Plymouth Fury is no longer possessed by the ghost of Roland LeBay. No, from scene 1, the movie makes it clear that Christine was simply born bad to the bone. Regarding the change, King said, "That's one of the questions with which the movie people started to wrestle. Was it LeBay or was it the car? When the film people came to me, I said, look, this is your decision. You decide what you're going to do with the story." But just like the novel, all three of our main characters stay in focus, with Dennis, Arnie, and Lee's relationship with one another all revolving around how Christine changes them. All great performances, and Keith Gordon is fantastic at portraying Arnie's arc, from embarrassing nerd to burgeoning cool guy to killer creep.
Don't touch me, shitter! Oh, this is just me. Get away from her! Get away from her!
And Harry Dean Stanton and Robert Prosky are here, so you know the movie's good. A lot of Carpenter's filmography is either in conversation with the past, or with the current state of the country at the time of filming. Assault on Precinct 13 transplants Rio Bravo into the modern day. They Live turns modern capitalism into an alien conspiracy. In Christine, Carpenter is doing both, as Reagan's America is in full swing. Film critic Jay Hoberman highlights how the wave of nostalgia for the 50s, in both film and politics during the late 70s and early 80s, were tied together in mainstream popular films and Reagan's election. These 80s movies are symptoms of something, and Reagan is a symptom too, said Hoberman. They come out of the same social need. When nostalgia became recognized as a concept, even around 1970 and 71, it was typically focused on the 1950s. Or, rather quickly, on an imaginary version of the 50s. That wasn't Reagan's period. If he was going to be nostalgic for anything, it was the 1940s. But he was able to conjure up this imaginary past that was very appealing to people, and that was already going on TV with Happy Days, and in movies like American Graffiti. There are many other examples of this. So Reagan rode in on a wave of nostalgia. Then there's the bicentennial in 1976, which is all about that too. Americans needed that. They wanted that. By making Christine sentient from so-called birth instead of animated by LeBay's spirit, Carpenter's Plymouth Fury is the living embodiment of the 50s, returning to glory 2 decades later and taking Arnie with her. Christine is the machine sister of Michael Myers. She's born bad, and like in Halloween, Carpenter accepts the banality of evil. It simply exists, and we explore its effect on everyone around it. Like the book, LeBay's wife and young daughter both die in Christine, but while the book hints that these were sacrifices to imbue the car with power, they're deliberate acts by Christine in the film. Living ever since the assembly line, Christine eliminates anything between her and her love, wrapping them in the embrace of a long-gone time. With cinematographer Donald M. Morgan, Carpenter's typical anamorphic widescreen approach to filmmaking evokes a classical sense that, as always, homages Howard Hawks and the films that influenced the filmmaker. It's this blend of filmmaking technique and aesthetics pulled from the past, but placed squarely within the present, that creates a tension within time. One of the best scenes in Carpenter's entire filmography revolves around Christine fully revealing her true self to Arnie, instantly self-repairing after being attacked, in a display that's akin to a lover taking off their clothes for the first time.
Okay. Show me.
It's an incredible piece of filmmaking, thanks to special effects supervisor Roy Arbogast, creating a rubber model of the Fury, dented with hydraulics and filmed in reverse. The result is a fully sentient car that seduces Arnie, comforting to a lover, terrifying to a victim. Christine can't die. The past won't go away. And Carpenter, with collaborator Alan Howarth, score the scene with a seductive, saxophone-laced sound. So much of Christine's score is subtle, far less instantly iconic than something like Halloween or Escape from New York. But its push and pull between the low-key seduction for Arnie's love theme and the driving, pulsing anger of Christine's kills make it one of Carpenter's best. In King's book, Christine de-ages as the odometer goes in reverse, a process that needs a sacrifice. And after suppressing the memory for months, Arnie remembers how he repaired Christine and hurt his back. That night, after he had taken his almost totally destroyed Plymouth from the airport and back to Darnell's, and after the place was empty, he had put Christine's transmission in neutral and pushed her until she began to roll on her flat tires. Pushed her until she was out the door and he could hear the wind of November keening sharply around the wrecks and abandoned hulks with their stellated glass and their ruptured gas tanks. He had pushed her until the sweat ran off him in rivers, and his heart thudded like a runaway horse in his chest, and his back cried out for mercy. He had pushed her, his body pumping as if in some hellacious consummation. It's a sexual act that fully turns Arnie into the hateful, decrepit LeBay.
No shitter ever came between me and Christine.
In the novel, Arnie loves Christine because LeBay loved Christine. In the film, Arnie is in a romantic relationship with her. She is freedom, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all the components of the American myth said to turn a boy into a man. But no one would want to be the man Arnie becomes. Like the book, Christine tracks down Arnie's enemies one by one, picking them off, only much more independently. But whereas a book can put us in the headspace of a soon-to-be victim, making us sympathize with even the worst people as we experience their last moments, film is more removed. And honestly, even at her most terrifying, monstrous moments, Christine is the coolest. All that shiny chrome reflecting the neon night is, just like American Graffiti, a beautiful trip into the past. Christine roars, burns, smashes, and destroys in these cinematic, stalking set pieces that ooze with atmosphere. Rock and roll is here to stay. In the years since, Carpenter has made it clear that he made Christine as a work for hire and not as a passion project. When reflecting on his film, Carpenter said, "It just wasn't very frightening, but it was something I needed to do at that time for my career. But man, do I love Christine." For a decade and a half, Carpenter was firing on all cylinders. Even in a movie he felt detached from, the dude could do no wrong. In the massive, seemingly unending wave of King adaptations, Christine was early, buoyed by the increasing popularity of King's work, but not beholden to it. So such a major shift at the center regarding Christine's nature was taken in stride. With Carpenter's film bringing her to life on screen, the Plymouth Fury has a legend of all her own now, with the movie somewhat surpassing the book in the public consciousness as an aggressive vision of the past. Which is funny given how all three of our stories disillusion us of our rose-colored view of the past in their own ways. With its setting in the summer of '62, American Graffiti is set right before the United States was changed forever. The Cuban Missile Crisis in December of that year, Kennedy's assassination in 1963, the first US deployment into the Vietnam War in 1965. Lucas hammers home how what these characters had was lost forever, with an on-screen epilogue that details their fates. With John's death in a car crash and Terry missing in action in Anlock. It underlines not just that once the past is gone, it's gone, but that what's important is embracing your life now before it passes you by. Of course, that's the horror of Christine. The past never truly dying, and instead trying to rip you out of your life here and now. Like Lucas, King's perspective on the world was also disillusioned in the 60s. Regarding horrors connected to his memories of the 50s, King revealed that he didn't have any. All the macabre things that I can remember, and that come out of reality rather than something that I made up, started with the Kennedy assassination in 1963. I don't have any bad memories of the 50s. King's Christine is only evil because of LeBay's hatred. Carpenter's Christine is evil because it's a pure product of its time. Carpenter's film reminds us that the good old days of the 50s were no golden age. McCarthyism, the Cold War, segregation, the Korean War. Nostalgia picks and chooses what makes us feel good about the past in order to forget about the present. That's easier for some than others. King's novel and Carpenter's adaptation end with a blend of resolution and lingering fear, but in opposing ways. In both, Dennis and Lee are able to lure Christine into an abandoned warehouse and smash her until she can't reform. But while the novel has the pair fight against the self-driving car, the film reveals that Arnie was inside the whole time, dying in the fight and professing his undying love for the Fury. In the book, Arnie is out on the road with his mother, with both dying as Arnie crashes the car, resisting LeBay's spirit one last time at the cost of their lives. In one, Arnie's soul is saved. In the other, he is condemned to the past forever. And while Carpenter's film ends with the final ominous note that Christine may reform again one day, King's ending is the most ominous, with Dennis 4 years later learning of a fatal car crash that indicates Christine lives again, and will come for him very soon. Is it true? We're left to make our own conclusions, but in any case, the past can never fully die, as King leaves us with a final, haunting reflection. Of course, it's impossible, but it was all impossible to start with. I keep thinking of George LeBay in Ohio, his sister in Colorado, Lee in New Mexico. What if it started again? What if it's working its way east, finishing the job, saving me for last? His single-minded purpose, his unending fury. Whether it's the spark that keeps our hope alive, or the fire that stokes unending rage, the past, and our nostalgia for a time that was never as good as we imagine it, will never truly die in the mind that refuses to let it go. Thanks for watching today's video, and the first ever video I've done on a novel. Of course, I've done comic books in the past, but there are a lot of books that I've wanted to cover. And as a longtime Stephen King fan, and since I cover a lot of horror on the channel already, I thought a King book would be the perfect place to start. And of course, I'm also a huge John Carpenter fan, and I've covered many of Carpenter's movies already. So in this hybrid topic video, it was really fun for me to cover King, Carpenter, and also George Lucas's American Graffiti. I'm a huge fan of American Graffiti as well, and I think it's just a really fun, extremely perfectly nostalgic film. And putting it in contention with Christine, especially given how King cites graffiti as part of the inspiration for his book, was a great way for me to be able to talk about so many different topics at once. So I hope that you enjoyed this rather out of the ordinary video for the channel, because I had a lot of fun making it, and I would love to do more like this in the future. Of course, more Carpenter, as always. I'll probably cover every single one of his movies at some point, but especially Stephen King. I have a lot of different King topics in mind, and as I mentioned in the video, a video covering the theme of Americana horror in King's work is something that I've been thinking about for a while. That's a really wide-ranging topic, and it will take a lot of research, but as someone that's read a lot of Stephen King books in the past, and continues to read them in my free time, I'm really excited to cover that topic at some point. Christine the novel and Christine the movie aren't perfect, and aren't the best of either of their creators' works, but there's something about them that I really find so interesting and fun. They're dark stories, but they're also really cool, so hopefully you enjoyed this deep dive into them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Christine the movie and Christine the book, as well as your favorite Stephen King novels. The guy's made like 50, so there are a lot to choose from. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on what other Stephen King books you'd like for me to cover in the future. The Dark Tower would be a fascinating topic for me, and I would probably do that with one video per book at a time. But that all depends on general interest in novel-centric videos. As always, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my patrons for the continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. Until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves, and remember, you better watch what you say about my car. She's real sensitive.